On March 20th, the first day of spring, I decided to start another city trip off on Roosevelt Island to see if the cherry blossoms were blooming yet. Out of the subway station, I looked to the trees on the western side to see that the buds have just started to break. I crossed over through the park by Cornell Tech, where masked people were flying kites. On the east side of the island, I found that the trees looked different. Their branches had the familiar pastel pink flowers peeking out. This sight brought me back to one of my favorite days ever, which by the time I upload this would be 3 years since. But before the tour starts, how do you get to the island in the first place? Well, there's 3 ways. As I mentioned from the start, you may take the subway to the island, specifically the F line. Walking or driving to the island is also possible, yet only through the Queens side via the Welfare Island Bridge. Then there's my favorite method, the cable car. This is the method that most people will notice, as if you were to walk by 1st and 2nd Street near Lexington, you'd sometimes see a bright red gondola flying past the buildings. You'll find the cable car entrance at the foot of Queensboro Bridge, at 2nd Avenue between East 60th and 59th Street. On my first trip, I was curious to see how much a ride would cost me, and it turns out it'll only be the cost of a MetroCard swipe. At the moment, it's just $2.75. While on board, you'll be able to see a piece of Manhattan from a bird's eye view. Next to the line, you'll see cars and pedestrians make their way through the Queensboro Bridge. The cable car will take you around the same area as the subway station, at the center of the island. There's a little roundabout where you may see the island's very own shuttle system that runs without charge, or you can just walk around the corner from the tram station to find the visitors center. From there, I made my way to the island's north side towards the lighthouse. Making your way through Main Street will take you past the Riverwalk Crossing luxury apartments, aka properties that I could safely bet will cost you an arm and a leg and maybe your firstborn. The area is second to none when it comes to picnicking, especially during this season when cherry blossom festivals would usually take place. If you didn't pack anything, there's still restaurants like a bar and a Japanese restaurant, a convenience store, or if you're particularly short on cash, casual chains like a Starbucks or a Subway in the middle of it all. Walking past the glass tunnelways will also reveal local shops, recreation centers, libraries, and the New York staple Chinese takeout. The first historical location approaches, which would be the Blackwell House. I've never been inside the house itself, but it seems that they offer free tours with an appointment weekly from Wednesday to Sunday, 30 minutes each visit. The name of the house comes from the name of Roosevelt Island back when New York was held by the Dutch and called New Amsterdam. Back then, Roosevelt Island was known as Blackwell Island, 2 centuries before FDR was born. This house was when the Dutch owner of then Blackwell Island lived, and eventually where workers of the nearby Octagon and nearby City Hospital resided. When I visited in 2018, the house was fenced off with only a peephole allowing me to read the plaque. It's good to return to it and see its refurbished state. It also felt good to be able to stand at the porch without any problem. The official island's website says that reconstruction completed October of last year. Structures like these are protected from destruction due to their historical significance by the Department of the Interior, which the posted plaque I mentioned denotes. The walk from the Blackwell House to the next site showed me the territory's refreshing simplicity. It's kind of crazy that there's such a contrast right next to a place as complex as the Manhattan mainland. There's parks left and right where you can play soccer, handball, or take your dog to a dog run, even if I don't really understand what it is, but it's there. Soon enough, I approached the parking area in what used to be a Gristeed's grocery, yet today it's a food town. This is where cars and pedestrians find their way into the island. Right by the entrance of the grocery is an atrium in which you could go up some stairs into the bridge that connects you to Queens. Now comes an interesting part of the island's history. And for those who are interested in women's history, journalism, or mental health, a building known as the Octagon. You will find yourself here when continuing down Main Street and past the food town. The Octagon was a mental health hospital notorious for mistreating its patients, and this fact didn't exactly come to light until Elizabeth Cochran, more known as Nellie Bly, decided to fake illness in order to create her expose dubbed 10 Days in a Madhouse. In a nutshell, the conditions were pretty bad. Patients were subject to verbal and physical abuse by the workers, not to mention filthy conditions similar to industrial area factories. This report, of course, made waves in reforms regarding hospitals such as that one, plus gave credibility to women journalists. Today, the building remains as a historical set piece, much like the previously mentioned Blackwell House, protected from demolition by the Department of the Interior. And today, the building also serves as a connection to the nearby apartment complex, plus was graded as a leader of sustainable energy usage. It's most definitely a story of redemption, if ever I heard one. Towards the northern tip of the island, you'll see yet another park, as well as the historical landmark of the island's lighthouse. The lighthouse wasn't the focus of my interest as much as the walk there was, especially since the lighthouse significance relies more on legendary stories rather than concrete history. I'll leave you some footage of that day 3 years ago. Then I'll loop around to the western section of the north side of the island. The western portion of the island does not contain many points of interest as Main Street, but there are still some sights of note. For one, when walking down the river, your attention may be drawn to little house sculptures peeking out of the water. This is a fairly recent installation called The Marriage of Real Estate and Money, which is a commentary that I find humorously relevant in regards to the properties that would cost appendages and sons that I mentioned before. The sculpture's title speaks for itself, and artist Tom Otterness seems to utilize its presence in the water by depicting the figures drowning. More of the quaint residential attitude showed itself as I walked past a school, a hospital, and various riverside properties. As the northern section of the island boasts its residential area, the southern side instead contains Cornell Tech, a held field, and 3 more historical installations. Due to the sheer space of this section of the island, this is where the Cherry Blossom Festivals take place. I've attempted to participate 2 years ago, and the lines are killer. Thankfully, looking at the trees costs nothing, and if you time it correctly and visit the days following the event like I did unexpectedly, you'll have a lot more peace. Although I do understand that many would prefer the excitement of a Matsuri, and I do have to admit to having the regret of missing out on that. Before heading to the southern tip of the island, you will encounter this building that could easily be mistaken as a park maintenance shed. This was a laboratory that existed during the industrial period of New York history. Interestingly enough, this laboratory specialized in diseases and viruses. Today, it serves an entirely different purpose: to hold power needed for the subway tunnel underneath. But keep the notion of pathogens, because the nearby historical landmark is the Smallpox Hospital, which still remains in its ruinous state. Unlike most other landmarks here, the Smallpox Hospital is completely inaccessible at the moment, but I do have to admit that it feels pretty wild to see, especially since this hospital was built after the vaccine of smallpox. I do not intend for this site to be used to make any statements about current happenings, but it is kinda crazy to hear about quarantines and look back at a relic of a past plague that's struggling to stay up despite many stabilization efforts. In complete contrast is the final landmark seated just right next to this ruin, the FDR Four Freedoms Park. This is a completely modern structure, only older than Cornell Tech's presence in this island being built in 2007, 14 years ago. There isn't much to say about this place regarding its short history, but it does reflect the island's current name and dedication to 32nd US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There's a triangular square that leads to a giant effigy of FDR's head, plus the Four Freedoms written behind it, which is a universal statement of human rights during the late stages of World War II. The Four Freedoms Park area is where the tea ceremony and performances would take place. In the summer, this place becomes a hotspot again for Independence Day. This is where people can get great views of 4th of July fireworks overlooking the tip of this island. As I look back to that Earth Day 3 years ago, I realize how rich in history this island is, still holding artifacts of eras from different attitudes, which contrasts to such a bright moment. To tell you the truth, I've had my own set of historic changes for the past 3 years, as did the world. Yet it felt so good to backtrack to such a great day, and I have to thank you for coming along with me in this as well. If I were to liken Roosevelt Island to something like I did for Washington Heights and the Dominican Republic, I would say that Roosevelt Island is a lot like Boston, complete with a historical trail and peaceful community within a metropolis. It is a showcase of the evolution of American attitudes and a will to get a little bit better than yesterday. I would say that, like the Four Freedoms, it extends from American life to life in general, like the symbolism of a cherry blossom. And like a cherry blossom, although days like these are temporary, we should always hope that it'll bloom again in the future.